Little Bighorn battlefield through a survivor's eyes. Not a single man survived to tell the tale of Custer's final moments. Of the 210 soldiers who rode with Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer in his direct command, that fateful day of June 25, 1876, every last one perished. In what remains America's most infamous military disaster, their bodies were found, scattered across the battlefield, some mutilated beyond recognition, others clutching empty weapons in a final, desperate stand. If you're fascinated by pivotal moments in history that changed nations forever, hit that subscribe button on Native Legends and History, stories where we bring the past vividly to life. What really happened during those chaotic hours at Little Bighorn, while Custer's immediate command was wiped out to the last man? Other soldiers from the 7th Cavalry survived to tell this harrowing tale. While serving with Major Reno's battalion, the soldier experienced firsthand the decisions and circumstances that culminated in what we now call Custer's last stand. His account provides a rare window into those fateful days. We departed from Rosebud Creek at noon on June 22, 1876. I remember checking my saddle straps one final time as Lieutenant Colonel Custer gave the order to move out. Our column marched approximately 12 miles along the Rosebud before establishing camp for the night. Few men spoke much that evening. We all sensed we were venturing deeper into contested territory with each mile. I rose before dawn on June 23rd, joining my comrades as we broke camp and continued our march along a well-worn trail. The day's journey was deliberately measured. I noticed how Custer kept our forces consolidated as we pushed several more miles before making camp again by evening. Even then, as a common soldier, I understood the methodical pace. Custer was preserving the strength of both men and horses for what he believed would be the decisive confrontation. During that afternoon, I was refilling my canteen when I noticed a commotion near the head of our column. 6 Crow Scouts that Custer had dispatched earlier had returned with news. I edged closer to hear what I could. Many pony tracks fresh, one scout reported. Tracing patterns in the air with his hands. Sioux village not far, very big. The concern in their voices needed no translation. I watched as Custer immediately gathered his officers in a tight circle away from us enlisted men. From where I stood with my unit, I could see their animated gestures, but couldn't hear their discussion. The meeting lasted only minutes before the officers dispersed to their respective units, their faces grim with determination. Custer sent scouts ahead once more. By late afternoon, we reached an abandoned Native American village and established camp there, roughly 2 miles from the Rosebud Fork. I helped raise tents among the empty lodges, silent reminders of recent occupation that created an unsettling feeling as darkness fell. Throughout the evening, tension built in camp as scouts continually came and went. I was nearly asleep when orders came to break camp at 11 o'clock that night. We resumed marching up the right fork of Rosebud, moving through darkness with minimal conversation. Keep noise to an absolute minimum, our sergeant whispered as he moved among us. No talking, no clanking equipment. I carefully wrapped my canteen to prevent it from rattling against my belt buckle. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the soft footfalls of horses and men. By dawn, scouts returned with news that made my stomach tighten. They had spotted a village approximately 3 miles beyond the fork where they had previously identified native settlements. Our forces took cover in a ravine near creek headquarters. I pressed myself against the cool earth, grateful for the natural terrain that shielded us from potential observation. I watched as Custer rode forward with his officers to survey the area personally. When he returned an hour later, his confidence surprised me. I see nothing up ahead, he declared loudly enough for many of us to hear. Nothing at all. This contradicted what the scouts and a mixed-blood intermediary named Nook Boer had reported. Standing nearby, I heard Boer insist, "The village is there, my eyes do not lie to me." The disagreement created tension. You could feel like a storm brewing. Then scouts returned with alarming news that Sioux warriors had discovered our presence and were observing our movements. A ripple of unease passed through our ranks. As this information spread, Custer's response was immediate. "Prepare for battle," he ordered, his voice carrying across our position. I checked my rifle, counted my ammunition, and tightened my saddle straps. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept them busy with familiar tasks. We advanced cautiously, following a small stream. About 5 miles from the mouth of the Little Bighorn Valley, I rode near the center of our column, constantly scanning the ridge lines for movement. During this advance, we encountered a solitary Native American teepee containing a dead warrior. Our scouts examined the scene briefly, exchanging concerned glances. Something about this discovery seemed to trigger urgency. In Custer's assessment, he immediately issued orders for a message to Colonel Reno, instructing him to drive the scouts into what was described as a dust cloud. I watched the messenger gallop away toward Reno's position. None of us realized then that this order would place Reno's battalion, my battalion, at the forefront of one of the most notorious military engagements in American history. None of us knew that this would be the last time many of us would see Custer alive. Colonel Reno led us across the open plain, and we forded the river at a natural crossing point. After advancing about 1 mile, we dismounted in the woods and prepared to fight on foot. I watched as men quickly secured their horses to nearby trees and formed into position. "Dismount and form a skirmish line." Reno shouted his command, echoing down our ranks as we hurried into defensive positions. Native American warriors on horseback immediately charged across the prairie toward our line. Our scouts opened fire at the advancing force, but it quickly became clear we were vastly outnumbered. As Native warriors moved to cut off our retreat path back to the ford, Reno ordered us to fall back to the woods. "Back to the timber, fall back to the timber." The command passed down our line as we began a hasty withdrawal. Our retreat was chaotic. Sioux warriors pursued us relentlessly, their accurate fire at close range eliminating any chance of a safe withdrawal. Horses and comrades fell around me under the barrage. Those of us still standing scrambled desperately for cover among the trees and underbrush. I managed to gather 13 soldiers, several of them wounded, and guided them to shelter deeper in the forest. The injured men wanted to abandon their position and flee, but I convinced them to stay and fight. "If we break for the river now, we're dead men," I told them firmly. "Our only chance is to hold position and wait for an opportunity. I've been in tight spots before. There's still hope if we keep our heads." The wounded soldiers' faces pale with pain and fear nodded grimly and checked their ammunition. We remained hidden in the thickets for hours, listening to sporadic gunfire echoing from a distance. We debated whether it was Custer's detachment engaging Native forces, but none of us could be certain of what was happening beyond our limited view of the battlefield. When the distant shooting finally subsided, I instructed the men to move. Some were too weak from blood loss or too terrified to respond, but those who could still walk followed my lead. We crossed the river in small groups, using the growing darkness as cover. We joined what remained of Reno's command on the hills, just as Native warriors began streaming back from the direction of Custer's last known position. Night was falling, bringing with it an ominous silence. From the area where we expected to find the general, "Something's wrong," muttered a sergeant beside me. As we watched warriors returning from the north, there should be signals from the general's position by now. We used everything at our disposal to strengthen our defensive position. Dead horses, saddles, and packs were arranged as makeshift barricades. We worked through the night, digging shallow rifle pits with bayonets and mess kits when proper tools weren't available. Before dawn, the Native Americans intensified their attack on our position. Warriors charged up the slopes toward our improvised fortifications, some firing rifles, while others hurled rocks when they came within range. The first light of day revealed our precarious situation. We were surrounded outnumbered and cut off from any immediate support. "Hold your fire until they're within 50 yards," shouted an officer near me, his voice steady despite our dire circumstances. "Make every shot count. We don't know when resupply will come." The question on everyone's mind remained unspoken, but evident in the worried glances exchanged between us. Where was Custer, and why had we heard nothing from his command? By mid-morning we had gone 36 hours without water. Under the scorching heat, men around me began to plead for water, their cracked lips and hoarse voices betraying their desperate thirst. The fighting showed no signs of ending, as our situation grew increasingly dire. Many men suffered with swollen tongues, making it impossible to swallow. I observed soldiers attempting to eat hardtack biscuits, but failing to produce enough saliva to soften the rock-hard rations. Some tried chewing grass for moisture, but it only stuck to their parched lips, rendering them unable to speak or spit it out. Our medical officer informed Reno that the wounded wouldn't survive much longer without water. They had reached dangerous levels of dehydration. After a brief consultation, several soldiers volunteered for what everyone recognized as a potentially fatal mission: to retrieve water from the river below. Between our position on the hills and the water's edge lay approximately 700 yards of exposed terrain. To reach the ravine that led to the river, we would need to sprint across 100 yards of open ground, directly in the sights of native sharpshooters, positioned along the rocky ridges. Despite knowing the risks, I joined the volunteers. Our plan was simple but dangerous. We would descend in numbers, hoping that not all of us would be hit. Around 50 men gathered at the edge of our defensive position, canteen strapped across our bodies, preparing for the desperate dash. At the lieutenant's signal, we rushed down toward the valley, zigzagging to make ourselves more difficult targets. Bullets kicked up dust around our feet as we ran. When we reached the bottom of the ravine, we discovered that native warriors had concealed themselves in the woods across the river and were guarding the water. We could approach within about 30 yards of the shore, but anyone who ventured closer immediately drew concentrated fire. Despite the danger, we couldn't return empty-handed. Several of us made quick dashes to the river's edge, filled our canteens while partially submerged, and then took cover behind rocks at a bend in the ravine, where we could fill additional containers before retreating uphill. "Worth it," gasped Private Miller through clenched teeth as we dragged him back to safety with a bullet lodged in his leg bone, his canteen still clutched in his hand. One young soldier wasn't fast enough and took a fatal shot to the chest as he bent over the water. 6 or 7 others were wounded during our desperate mission, but we managed to collect enough water to provide some relief for the wounded and the men holding our perimeter. Miller's shattered leg would later require amputation. We distributed the precious water among the wounded first, giving each man just enough to wet his lips and tongue. The relief on their faces was immediate, though we all knew our small victory was temporary. Without reinforcements, we remained trapped on that hill, surrounded by warriors who seemed to have endless patience and ammunition. Around 2 o'clock, the Native Americans began to withdraw, though sporadic fighting continued until late afternoon. By sunset, the last of the Indigenous forces had left the battlefield. We finally managed to provide water to our animals, many of which were nearly exhausted, and allowed them to graze on the sparse grass. Colonel Reno consolidated our position and moved us to higher, more defensible ground that evening. We spent the night in tense anticipation, expecting another native attack at daybreak. However, when dawn came, not a single warrior remained in sight. The sudden absence of our enemy was almost as unnerving as their presence had been. The men grew confident that help was on its way. Around 10 o'clock, word spread that General Terry was just 6 miles away, advancing into the valley with a substantial force. Soon we spotted his troops moving toward our position. Mr. Henn, who had been with the scouts on Reno's left flank, rejoined our group and recounted what he had witnessed. He had been part of a group of about 60 men, 35 Native Americans, 6 friendly Sioux, 6 Crow, and various white men. He described seeing a rest scout raise his arm, perhaps already dead, with a bloodied knife in hand before collapsing. Hen presumed that 2 cavalry men he had left behind in the woods had also perished when they couldn't be found. He had observed Lieutenant McIntosh attempting to ride back toward the ford on a soldier's horse when he was killed. McIntosh's own mount had been shot early in the battle. Lieutenant Hodson, whose horse had fallen into the river, leaving him wounded, was also spotted by Hen. Hodson had tried to cling to the horse's tail and climb the opposite bank, but as soon as he reached it, a native marksman shot him. Hayden noted that the Native Americans had been unable to capture any of Custer's supply packs or mules as they had remained with other units. He doubted whether they had taken more than 100 of Custer's horses, since most had been killed during the fighting. More disturbingly, he suspected some men had been tortured after being captured alive. Isaiah Dorman, a Black Scout, showed signs of light gunshot wounds to his legs that appeared to have been inflicted while he was still alive. Another man's body had been skinned. The battlefield was filled with elderly, Native Americans and women, wailing in frantic grief over their dead. During both the 25th and 26th, a hidden sniper on a nearby hill methodically picked off our men one by one while Native Americans below fired at us with a buffalo rifle. His aim was deadly accurate. Though we couldn't see him, each shot claimed either a man, a horse, or a mule. He proved more dangerous than the warriors below. Captain Ryan eventually used a long-range rifle to take him down when I climbed that hill after the battle. I found the sniper lying behind rocks he had arranged as a defensive position, the buffalo rifle still in his hands. Most of the Native Americans had retreated to their village to mourn their dead. As the day progressed and the smoke began to clear, they left us on the hill with only enough warriors to maintain the siege. None of us had eaten since leaving camp with Custer early that day. By then, we were chewing raw bacon and hard biscuits, which tasted like straw without water. Most of us were completely exhausted. Some men simply collapsed where they stood, too tired even to consider what might happen next. Unfortunately, I was assigned night guard duty and stood outside Reno's tent. Inside, I could hear him drinking heavily from a barrel. He said to another officer, "I wonder where the Mura of the American Army is now," followed by a sneering laugh as I passed by, though I didn't know who Mura was. I felt uncomfortable hearing Reno mock Custer. I walked past men still sleeping on the ground, while those who wouldn't survive lay silently beside them. The night had grown disturbingly quiet. The valley below, which had been filled with gunfire, smoke, and chaos throughout the day, now lay as silent as a graveyard. I heard the mournful crying of Native Americans, grieving their dead, and the distant sound of tom drums. Occasionally I paused, hoping to glimpse or hear Custer and his men quietly approaching our position. I couldn't stop staring at the hillside where we had last seen him, unrelenting fear causing my body to ache. As the night progressed, nothing happened and the air grew still and thick. When morning finally arrived, we waited for whatever might come next. Tension enveloped us like a cloud. It became increasingly difficult for everyone to survive without food and water. Some men sat in silence, lost in thought, while others mumbled incoherently in their sleep. My thoughts returned to Dandy, my horse, and Custer's. I recalled the moment he was shot and felt overwhelming regret. That sorrow remained with me, making it difficult to abandon the belief that we were doomed, and the worst was yet to come. We understood we needed to be ready for anything. As this unsettling silence continued, the Battle of Little Bighorn stands as a pivotal moment in American history. A bloody collision between two worlds, fighting for their future. In the years that followed, the true stories of those who fought and died there would be buried beneath myth and legend. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories to uncover the authentic voices of America's past.